In order to create a convincing 3D model, our next step is to apply what we call material to it. Now, the material can be interchangeably used throughout this course. You're going to hear several different terms such as material, image map, and there's a few others that I'll touch on here. But ultimately, what we're going to do is take a two-dimensional photograph or graphic and bring it into Max and apply it. Now, you simply just don't go to File, Open a Material, and drag it in there. It doesn't work that way. You need to use Max's Material Editor. And the Material Editor is represented by the sphere checkerboard pattern with the little icon. When we open up the Material Editor, there are two Material Editor formats. The first one I skipped and I went right into the second one, and to get that you pretty much hold down on the Material Editor. You'll notice the two icons. We're going to be using this first one here with the smaller icon. That's the Compact Material Editor. Now, the other one is called the Slate Editor, and it is it's highly advanced, and we may touch this later on, but it's node based. It's sort of like a draw tree where everything's available to you to the left, and you just drop and drag and connect things. What we're going to do is more of a user interface here, kind of graphical interface where we can see the materials a little bit better in these slots. Now, this is the Material Editor, and if you're using the standard 3ds Max 2011, you should have something similar to this when you open up the Compact Material Editor. You'll have 6 slots that are all grayed out. There's no materials in there yet. It's a standard down here on the right, a series of icons on both sides, as well as a whole bunch of properties down here. And we're going to be exploring all of these within the next few moments. Now, I don't want to go through too many of these right off the bat. Get Material will allow us to go out and find a material somewhere in the map browser, especially if we've already created in the scene. And as you notice, we only have 6 materials here, but you can hold up to 250. So in order to jump through some of these, you'll have to scroll back and forth, up and down, and then actually hide some and introduce more as we go on. So there's very little limit on what we can do for materials. As we scroll down here, another one, to get rid of a material, you can hit the X button, and you can either remove it from the slot or from the scene, or both. So when we start getting into materials, we'll show you how to do that. Down here, there's a Put to Library button. We're going to learn how to create a series of different unique materials and put them in a library on our computer so that we can retrieve them at a later time. Perhaps you have a special wood grain flooring that you're going to use in several scenes. You can put that into a personal library so that you don't have to search the Autodesk library every time you need it. Next is the Material ID channel. This is simply just a number that designates that material. 9 times out of 10, you can leave it set at 0 because that number is irrelevant. However, there are certain features we're going to learn in the next couple weeks. In order to make like a material glow, we'll need to apply a special number to that and then designate that number to be the glowing color. So we will come back to the Material ID channel number. Next here is an icon that allows us to see the viewport representation of that graphic. Now, it's going to happen in a little bit. We're going to create a material, we're going to drag it on there, and you're going to notice that you're not going to see that material right off the bat. You have to hit that icon, and that will represent the material. And the only reason we do that is because when we're working in the wireframe mode and the viewport mode, we do not want to overload it. We want it to run smoothly, and if we keep adding materials and making them visible, the viewport will run slower. Truthfully, the materials do us no good until we actually do the final render. So we want to limit the amount of time if we do this. Once we're happy with the material, we should shut that off and move on. There's going to be other couple elements here. Go to parent and go forward to sibling. Those are going to make sense when we start breaking down sub-menus down here in the Material Editor. If you notice here we have a sample type. If we hold that down, we can change the highlighted material to a certain feature. Perhaps we're working with like a pop can. A sphere does us no good when we're laying out a pop can label. So we'd want to go to cylindrical or even box if we're working with something that's boxy and not spherical. So that changes right up here. We also have background. We can change that. Of course, that's going to do us no good because we have the material right now, so we'll let that go by default. There's some UV tiling we're going to talk about. The other one I'd like you to hit here is called Options, and that's a little check mark next to the sphere. When you open up your options, what you're going to see are, well, just that, options. The only one we're going to be concerned with at this point down here is where it says slots. And that is because we potentially want more visible slots at one time instead of scrolling. I always work with 6x4. So I hit 6x4 and hit apply. And now what you're going to notice over in the material editor once I hit OK is that I can see a lot more material than I did before. I can see a multiple range. So if I'm working with a large scene and I have lots of materials, I can see those and work with them. That's your preference, but you find that under options. If you like the 3x2 and you don't mind scrolling, all the same, that's your preference. So those are just some of the icons we're going to be working with here. You will notice that when you select on each material, down here it says 05, 06 default. These here are the default material labels. And when we bring a material in, we're going to go and change that name. So maybe we're working with wood that's going to be for the floor. We'll highlight that and call it floor material. That way we'll be able to jump through and designate certain materials to certain objects as we go. To the right you have the map browser icon that starts off as standard. If you hit that, you get what we call the material map browser. And we're going to be doing a lot of work in here. There are tons of different layers of materials. The standard materials are just that. They're the materials that are available to you when working with the scan line rendering. In a bit, we'll change to Mental Ray. And you will notice when you open Mental Ray that there's a whole new series of materials specially made for the Mental Ray render engine. If you're working with V-Ray or I-Ray, any of those other rendering engines, you will see additional materials for those rendering engines. You can open up any panel by hitting the little plus sign. Notice we have nothing in scene right now, so it's blank. We also have all of our slots here. That will change as we start adding materials to them. But standard is pretty much just that. It is a standard material. It allows you to change the color, the opacity, the shininess. But there's a lot of other built-in ones, such as architectural, that I'm going to encourage you to use. Double click on architectural, and you're going to notice that we have a different format. Where it says templates, you can go down and pick a template. So if you're working with material that's going to be plastic, you hit plastic, it's going to give it the attributes or the properties of a plastic object. Everything from the shininess to the transparency and whatnot. Now you can still make additional changes to those, and this is hit and miss. Each of you are going to have different materials you want to work with. But what I do challenge you to do is use the architectural button for your architectural house. Simply because these materials will make that much more of a difference in your house. Now you could also change the color of that by simply hitting the gray and saying I want blue plastic. And there you go. I can drag that material to there and I'd get a blue representation in the viewport. I hit the render button and it's not really impressive because there's nothing else in the scene for it to work with. There is no floor for it to reflect on. There's no light. There's no objects in the foreground or background. So just because you pick a material and you go, well, this is really neat, you're not necessarily going to get the same illusion you get up here. All right. Now, the other thing I can do, I'm going to select another material. I'm going to go back into my standard. I showed you architectural. I go back into my standard, and you'll notice by default, standard has several different options here. Some of them are pretty obvious. such as wireframe. When you click wireframe, your material turns to a wireframe mode. Now I can drag that material down, and you'll notice if I hit render, all that I see is the outline of that box. Now that also depends on the properties of that box too. So if I go into modify and I add 5 length segments, 5 width segments, and 5 height segments, now when I render again, you will notice that it updates showing me the wire mesh. So again, mesh complexity has a lot to do with materials. Now wireframe can be turned off, and you can play the other ones here, face map and whatnot. But we also have blend here, which a lot of these different settings you're going to see create different options for you to play around with. So you're welcome to go ahead. Blend is what we'll stay in pretty much for this course. Next, we have the blend basic parameters, such as self-illumination. Now, if you click that, you're going to notice nothing really happens because gray doesn't really illuminate very well, and it's saying that it's going to illuminate black. By going in and changing this color, maybe say to white, now that box illuminates white. Now again, if I hit my render button, all I get is this glowing box. It does have a little bit of a glow, but this is not quite what we're going to use for the glowing features. And again, there's nothing else in the scene for it to work with. There's no floor, there's no background, foreground. So again, the material can be deceiving at first. Now you can also go back, change this to black if you so want. Notice it will not glow. But you select off the self-illumination, you can adjust the color. Let's say I want this material to be yellow. I'm going to go in and hit ambient, make that yellow. And you'll notice how the box updates to the right automatically. Now if I select 50 in my self-illumination, this box will glow that yellow about 50%. Not quite 50%. You can go all the way up to 250 there, and you'll notice it gets brighter and brighter. And these properties can pretty much be animated. So when we get into animation, you'll be able to go in and change. You can make an item pulse, several different shades of color and whatnot. So we've looked at how to change color here. I'm going to go back and take us back down to 0. You also have opacity, similar to making something like glass. Notice now when I hit my render button, it just looks dull. And the reason why is, again, there's nothing behind this object. I can't see through it. Now if I was to create another object, say a teapot, and I put that behind the object and I hit render, now I can see that that box is 50% opaque because I can see, it's like translucent, I can see the teapot through there. Now this really isn't the best approach for glass. We're going to get to glass and water in a little while. But if you do need an item to be slightly translucent, transparent, you can adjust the opacity here. I'm going to take that back to 0. Notice it's completely invisible in the scene. So you can also animate that. You can make an object appear from being invisible and then kind of vaporize or whatnot. Specular is another shade that I'm going to throw an ugly blue in there just to give you a representation. Notice nothing really happens up here. And what specular is going to do is going to be the area of the object that's affected by the light. And you're not going to notice a difference here with nothing in the scene. As I hit render, nothing changes. But in a little while, we'll play around with some different shapes and show you how specular affects that item. We also have the specular highlights. As you raise the highlight, for instance 100, you'll notice now that the blue is starting to show up. And that pretty much is saying that this area is affected by specular light. And we're defining the color of that specular light, even though there's no light in our scene. You can also change its glossiness. By adding its glossy, it takes away a little bit from the specular, but makes it a little shinier. And you can play with the softening tools. So again, these are all variations of what's happening here, okay, with basic standard materials. Now that's fine and dandy. We haven't really worked with image maps. And in our next video, we're going to learn how to bring that 2D photograph in to one of these material slots and apply it to this box.